Hi BookTube, and welcome to my August wrap-up, which I'm actually doing on September 1st because I have time. Obligatory drink. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this in order, and this is not the first video I've made today. I'm a little scatterbrained, so just work with me. The first thing I read/listened to, I did it in tandem. I would go a chapter or two of reading and then a chapter or two of listening, which I think is the way I'm going to continue to finish this series. I did The Path of Daggers by Robert Jordan, which is book 8 in the Wheel of Time. My husband has them all on Audible. I have up to book 11, I believe, in actual book, so I have to get the other ones. And I'm debating trying to finish this year. My goal that I set out for myself in January was that I was going to read 3, and I think this is the second one, so I'm getting there. And the reading/listening way of doing it has seemed to really speed it up and help me out, so I'm going to continue it that way. There's nothing really to report on the Wheel of Time series. This just continues to follow everybody and stuff keeps happening. With such large series, I feel like when I give you anything, it's kind of spoilery. We're still following the same groups of people. The following of them is getting more spread out. I'm in the point where it's starting to drag. I think books 7 and 8, The Crown of Swords, The Path of Daggers, Winter's Heart, which is book 9, my husband says kind of drags as well, and then things start to ramp up after that. So I'm looking forward to that happening. There, Chunky Monkeys. This was my 500-page book for the month, because it's 500 plus. I'm trying to do one a month, and this came in at 672, so that of course qualified. As far as the series, it's a really good fantasy series. I just tend to bug out on series that are too long. 3 books, you've got me. 4 books, sure. 5 books, maybe. I managed to do the Malloreon and the Bulgaria just because they were such small books. Even though there were 6 of them, they were really small. So this one is kind of plodding. It's taken me years, and I don't know if I would reread it. I know my husband will re-listen to it, so it is what it is. And then I had let my husband pick my TBR for this particular month. I said, just pick 7 books. I'll see how far I get. That was one of them. And then another one he picked was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, which has made the rounds on BookTube. Everybody seems to have an opinion on it. Most people like it. I will tell you this. I have read too much sci-fi and too much fantasy for this to be mind-blowing. And I think that when I hear a lot of the praises it's getting, or a lot of the, oh, this is so new, this is so innovative, like the blah, 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 what people are really saying is, this is a literary attempt, it's a literary fiction attempt at a science fiction idea that has been around forever, and it's bordering on tropey. And so if you remove that, it's really beautifully written. I will give you that. It's beautifully written. But we're following essentially 3 main characters, which is our narrator, who's Kathy, and then her 2 friends, Ruth and Tommy. And we're told in the beginning that she is a carer, and she cares for people. And like as a professional, like a nurse almost. And these are her friends from Havisham. Havisham is set up as you believe this is a boarding school or a school. It's very British. This is a very British book. It's very boarding school British style stuff. And she recounts her time at Havisham, and there are some weird things that you notice about it. And quite frankly, if you pay attention to the introduction, like the introductory paragraphs, etc., of part 1, you kind of pick up on what's going on, and you can deduce the main plot twist very easily. And so we learn about her friendship with Ruth, who's very overbearing, very know-it-all, tends to fly by the seat of her pants. Kathy tends to be more introspective, hold on a sec, and more cautious. She starts having feelings and things. And Tommy, their other friend, who just kind of is a little bit of a spaz, but continues on. And we learn about their, what do they call them? Guardians. And they're not called teachers, they're called guardians. And these people are their guardians. And essentially, they have no parents. We get no backstory into their early years or their parents. All we know is that they grew up at Havisham. These guardians took care of them and oversaw their lives and their educations, etc. And they have weird educations. Then we move into knowing that they have no ability to reproduce. And ultimately, we find out that they serve a purpose. And I don't really want to do spoilers, but again, if you've read a lot of sci-fi or fantasy, or even a fair chunk of it, it's nothing new. And I think the people who are really blown away by all of this probably don't read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. It's a good book. The end I was kind of whatever about. What I will say is that the writing was really beautiful, and I will probably read more of Kazuo Ishiguro. I know I will because he is next for my hardcover reads, but yeah, it didn't blow me out of the water like some people, so I'm not sure if I'm just crusty or if it's my reading tastes or what have you. Next up, I read, or it was a reread because I've read this in high school, Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, which is my Penguin drop cap for the month. And the next one is actually Kazuo Ishiguro's Artist in the Floating World or something similar. And so this was translated by Joachim Neugroschel. And so this is the second time I've read it. Siddhartha, of course, is the classic tale. It's a classic Buddhist tale. This is a particular interpretation by Hermann Hesse, wherein the prince Siddhartha goes out to become enlightened. And this is his path to enlightenment as he goes through being various things, such as essentially, what are they called? A Sataman? He wants to go become a Sataman, I think. The Samanas, a Samana. So he goes to become a Samana, which is an ascetic who has renounced everything and live that way, where he has no clothes and no food, and they wander, and they learn prayer, and they learn how to deny their bodies. And then he goes on from there to say, okay, I need to go study with this Buddhist, and the Buddhist monk, or the coming of the Buddha, of the current Buddha, and he learns from that something else, and so he lives there, but then he decides that's not enough. He needs to go forth and continue on, and he continues on to meeting this woman, and then she will teach him the way of love, but first, or the way of the woman, the ways of, love and sex and all that stuff, if he, becomes rich. So he then uses everything he's learned to become rich and wealthy, and they have a time together, which results in a child. And then he goes off because he's got to keep going. He can't stop here. This is not enlightenment. So he goes off and ends up being a ferryman, and all the while he keeps running into his best friend, who's gone on his own journey and ended up staying with the Buddha and becoming a monk. And so really, it's a story of it's a parable of a man who is always seeking enlightenment, and he eventually finds enlightenment, etc., etc. It's a very good book. It's kind of hard because it's a major Buddhist philosophical text. I don't feel comfortable, like the Siddhartha and stuff, I don't feel comfortable saying if it's good or bad. It's a classic. It's something that everybody reads at some point. and it has started a lot of people down the path to Buddhism. So enjoyed it a second time. I think now that I'm older, it had a very different impact on me than it did when I was a teenager, which is when I first read it. And the last book I finished this month is Ruth Ozeki's A Tale for the Time Being. So I got 4 books out of the 7 my husband picked for me. I'm reading the 5th, and then there are 2 that I didn't get to. 2 or 3, I don't know. One of them I chose not to read because it's part of a series and it's a fantasy, and I figured that I want to get further into I want to get the Robert Jordans done before I go into another fantasy series, because I originally thought it was a trilogy and it turned out there's like 8 books in it. And then one is a horror book, which I do want to read, but I'm kind of pushing it till October because I think that would be perfect, because it's the 3rd book in the Ring series by, is it Koji Suzuki? I know it's Suzuki. I think it's Koji Suzuki. It's Loop, because I've read Ring and Spiral. Anywho, tangent. So the 4th book I finished was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, who is she Canadian? Or is she just from the Pacific Northwest? Where's my little write-up about Ruth? Blah, 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 blah. About the author. She lives in BC and New York City. Go figure. Where all of her work pretty much takes place. This is a 2013 Man Booker Prize finalist, and so I liked the book up until the last 50 pages or so. Maybe the last 100. Part 4, really. Part 4, it just all fell apart, and I was like, nope. Didn't need any of that. The book is basically, so we have our main character, who is Ruth, who lives in the Pacific Northwest. She lives somewhere near Campbell River, British Columbia, which, you know, is made out to be like this uber, like, foreign, remote place, and it's not. Just FYI. Yes, it is remote. Yes, it is north. But she makes it sound like it's Alaskan bush people, and it's not. And a lot of the things she talks about, like, the power's always going out, and they need a generator, and it's hard to get these things. That can just be a part of living in the Pacific Northwest, because that's where I live right now, and let me tell you, the power goes out during storm season all the bloody time, and it can be out for, it's been out for up to 3 days here before, so that, I think she's overselling that point, trying to say, oh, we're so remote, and we live in this, like, super remote place. And so our main character, Ruth, is a novelist who hasn't written anything in 10 years. She was taking care of her mother, who passed away after having dementia. Ruth's character, it can be really two-dimensional. Every now and then you get a three-dimensional portion of her, but for the most part, she's two-dimensional. And the way she interacts with her husband is really how we learn a lot about her. And her husband seems to be the emotional foil for her at times. Her husband is I want to say botanist, but that's not right. He deals mostly with plants and things, and they met in school-ish. They lived in New York. They moved to this remote place together after September 11th to be safe and because her mother needed care, which is nothing new. And so Ruth, our main character, is walking along a beach and finds some debris and picks it up, thinking it's garbage, takes it home to get rid of it, and it turns out to be a lunchbox that contains a notebook and some letters and a watch. And so she doesn't even care about it because she thinks it's just garbage, but her husband opens it and it becomes an obsession for her to finish reading this and deciphering it. The other thing about Ruth is that she's half Japanese, or at least Japanese enough that she can read some Japanese, because the entirety of the diary is written in Japanese. Letters are written in French, which was a issue that stuck in my mind because it's too perfect, right? Like, here's this this author who finds a diary written in a language that she can translate. And no, that's a little too on the nose. And they say it's from the tsunami, but we don't really know if it's from the tsunami that happened in Japan. And so the diary is the other portion. This is also told from Naoko, who is also called Nao, or Now. And so those portions are the translated version of the diary, where she's writing her diary to an imaginary person to somewhat keep herself sane, as her father, who lost his job during the dot-com bubble burst. We later find out it's a completely different reason, but that's what she originally starts with. And how her family had to move from the United States. She was originally from Japan, they moved to the United States, and then she had to go back to Japan, and just how bad her life was there. And, like, a lot of it is just teenage angst, etc. And then there's some really seriously bad things that go down in her life, and we're reading about them through this translation. And of course, it's all being translated by Ruth, who doesn't understand everything because it's been a long time. And so as she's trying to translate things, you get a lot of notes, the footnotes that go through things. And Now is also talking about her great-grandmother and her uncle, or no, her father's uncle, her granduncle, and their stories and how it intersperses with everything. I think if I hadn't read a lot of Mark Z. Danielowski, I would have found this to be far more innovative and I would have cared a lot more. But as it was, it just felt like they were trying to come off and do the same thing that he's been doing and not doing it as well. Because I think it works better in a creepy way. And in this way, it just irritated me a lot of the time. I liked the characters, I liked the story, except for the last 50 to 100 pages. It's a 400 and some page book. There's some appendices, and it gets a little stupid when it starts thinking that you can experiment with quantum physics and quantum mechanics when you're talking about a book. But I think she needed to pare down, and she didn't, which is why she was only a finalist. And I think if this was your jam, or if you really liked it and you like creepy books, then you really need to pick up House of Leaves and see how it can be done much better. Or even Only Revolutions would give you a taste of how this can be done much better. So I think I gave it 3 stars. It's a good quick read if it's something you are interested in. Like, I wouldn't say don't read it. It's a great summer read, but be aware it may irritate the crap out of you if you're like me. And so that was the last one I finished. I'm currently reading a Stanislaw Lem. That'll probably be the first thing I finish in September. And yeah, that was everything I read in August. I'm sorry I had such wide views going on there, but so it goes. And I will be doing my August haul a little later on. I did get a book outlet order in, so fun times there. And yeah, I hope everyone's reading is going well.